This is Unit 9, and in this unit we're going to be talking about the doctrine of creation, which is a particularly important doctrine, seeing that if God never chosen to create, none of us would exist. So I'm thankful that He did that. Of course, the topic of creation is a widely debated and hotly contested issue in Christian and non-Christian circles alike as to what exactly Christians mean about the doctrine of creation. As you're probably well aware, the larger atheistic world affirms something called naturalism. That is, a reject of anything that doesn't occur in the natural world. So they basically believe that this world came into existence apart from any sort of supernatural agents or causes. And there's different forms of atheistic worldviews related to this particular issue, and as to how exactly the creation or exactly how the universe came into being. That is, again, a contested issue among atheists. But you also have other worldviews that take on different perspectives, like Pantheism, which we discussed earlier when we're talking about the different models of God. Pantheism is a view that God and the universe are basically one and the same. You have views of religion wherein God exists alongside the eternal universe, that it's only God who brings things into order in the universe, but He doesn't necessarily create the universe from nothing. And then you have the traditional Judeo-Christian view that God did in fact create ex nihilo, which means that God created from nothing. That God did not use any previously existing material. God did not coexist with the universe eternally, but God created the universe, and the universe had a specific starting point, a beginning. And this creation has gone on since. That God has created this universe for His glory, for His will, for His purposes. And that is a traditional Christian view. But even among Christians, there's disagreement specifically about how and when God created. And we're going to talk in this unit about three basic views. Now, these three basic views are really systematic categories about how God created. We're not specifically at this moment talking about the ways that you interpret Genesis 1, though we will get to that. The three broad ways that Christians talk about the way that God created the universe is what's called Fiat Creationism, progressive creationism, and Theistic Evolution. Progressive creation is sort of a middle road between these two opposite positions. The Fiat creation says that God created the universe instantaneously or almost instantaneously, and sometimes we call this view young earth creationism. Theistic evolutionary positions say that God created the world through natural mechanical processes. Unlike a Darwinism or an atheistic sort of Darwinism, theistic evolutionists say that God engineered the process of evolution, that God was working in and through the process of evolution to bring about the result that He desired. And a lot of theistic evolutionists will even argue for a historical, literal Adam and Eve, though there is some variance on that. What they will say is that Adam was the first person who was given a human soul, a human spiritual nature. Is the first one to really become a true human person. But nevertheless, he did come from a long evolutionary process. So that's theistic evolution. And then the third sort of in-between position is progressive creationism. And progressive creationism is the view that the earth may be old, but God directly, specially created human beings. That human beings are not the result of a long evolutionary process where we've evolved from lower primates, but rather God directly and specially created Adam and Eve. And it just so happens that the world happens to be very, very old, and that the creation process of everything else has taken a very long time. So sometimes we call progressive creationism old earth creationism. And of course Christians disagree about these various positions. And a lot of that hangs or is contingent upon the interpretation of Genesis 1. Now, the Genesis 1 discussion is interesting because it's really about how best to read Genesis 1, whether we read it as a straightforward, literal 24-hour account, or 6 24-hour days, 7 24-hour day account of how creation came into being, which is a pretty traditional Christian view, or whether we take these days described in Genesis in different ways, like there's the day-age theory, which says basically that each day represents a significant period of time, that the earth might be millions of years old or billions of years old, but that these days represent significant or longer periods of time in the creative process. Then you have what's called a revelatory or pictorial day theory, which basically says that God might have taken a really, really long time to create the world, but the days described in Genesis 1 are the days in which God revealed himself to Moses, which is an interesting theory for a number of reasons, because the only way that we have access to creation is through God's revelation of creation. The rest of written history, recorded history, is recorded by human eyewitnesses, but there were no human eyewitnesses at the event of creation. So the pictorial or revelatory day theory says that God might have revealed himself across these 6 or 7 days to Moses, the author of Genesis, whoever he may be. And so that's a view that some theologians hold to. And then there's another theory that's gained a lot of traction and a lot of influence in the last couple of years, and that's called a literary framework theory, which basically says that Genesis 1 is written in a poetic way that mirrors days. Like day 1, God creates light. On day 4, he creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. On day 2, he creates the clouds and separates the firmament from the waters. In day 5, parallel, God creates the creatures that will inhabit the sky and the creatures that will inhabit the sea. In day 3, God creates the dry land, the earth. And in day 6, in parallel, God creates the creatures that will dwell on the dry earth, including man. And then day 7, God rests. And so this particular approach doesn't really speak, I think, necessarily to any particular view. I mean, God could have created by fiat, like the Fiat Creationists or the young creationists, earth creationists say. God could have created in a progressive way, like the progressive creationists say, or God could have created like the Theistic Evolutionists say with regards. So the reading of Genesis 1 with the literary framework isn't necessarily contingent on either one of those positions. That's why I want to distinguish between these issues. So this is of course a widely debated topic, and a topic that I think will make for some interesting discussion board fodder about how important or how essential our particular doctrine of creation is for the evangelistic process. Imagine what I want you to do, speaking to an atheist biology student at a local university. How would you discuss the gospel with this person, and to what degree do you bring in the doctrine of creation? And I make some suggestions along the way for how best to do that. So in this unit we have some readings from Erickson, from Grudem, and from Allison. We have some notes, we have a quiz, and hopefully, I think, an interesting discussion board question.